Welcome to the Renaissance Sermon. I am your host slash mystic, Sleepy, and this is going to be a pretty good episode, and we're going to start as always and per usual with a meditation slash breathing exercise. And I want everyone to go ahead and close their eyes. We're going to do 3 deep breaths, okay? And when you do the deep breath in, we're going to slow 5 count. Deep breath in, make sure you feel that lower lung, and then we're going to breathe out slowly as well. And we're just going to focus on really releasing the pressures of our week, okay? So what we're going to do is breathe in, breathe out. Okay, good. Shed all that stress, all of that, any type of obligations, any things that's really been piling up for the week. We're just going to let it all go. Good. Breathe in through your nose. Make sure you go in through your nose. Breathe out. Okay, just let it all go. All that stress, the financial obligations, anything else, okay? Credit card debt, anything. Good. All right, breathe in. Good. Breathe out. Let all that stress go, okay? All those responsibilities, I'm not sure if I said this, the credit card debt, let it all go. Good. All right, nice. Now, you're going to keep your eyes closed, okay? Now I want you to go ahead and imagine whatever entity you pray to, whether that be a deity or a god, okay? Just go ahead and imagine that, right? And even a demon, we don't judge here, okay? Good. Now, what I want you guys to do is, I want you guys to imagine how much it's worth to you to connect to whatever deity or whatever entity that you have pictured in your mind's eye right now, okay? All right? Just don't even think about any of the obligations that you have. None of that matters. Just think about that. Good. Okay. Try to get a number in your head, okay? Something that'll really go through on the credit card. Good. Now this next part, you're probably gonna have to open your eyes for, okay? So what I want you guys to do is I want you to open the link in the description, and I want you to go to the coffee link, and I want you to donate whatever that amount is to the coffee link. Good. Now you can close your eyes one more time, and you can just see that entity smiling right at you. And you did great. You did really wonderful. Okay, now that the meditation, the important segment is really out the way in terms of getting this thing started, we're going to first start off, we're going to kick this off with an understanding of really just the astrology for this week, right? So you got Mercury going retrograde. That'll be happening. It's about July 18, 2025, but whenever you have this particular phenomena, it's going to be different depending on depending on your individual chart, if Mercury's touching your particular sign or whatever. But there are kind of blanket descriptions. I always say go and look at what's happening in this particular time. It's going retrograde in the sign of Leo, so you can look at that and see what's really going on there. And like I said, try to find someone online that kind of connects with you and feels like they can they can provide you with some type of unique insight, right? And that's, we're not gonna focus too much on the actual meaning itself. And like I said, there's plenty of people out there. Always look and find someone that's really that you feel like you really connect to, and it doesn't matter if you notice some differences between my particular system and their particular system. It's all about what they connect to in terms of however they see things, okay? So try not to assume that this is the one true way, okay? I listen to different people all the time. I expect you guys to be able to do the same thing, okay? Now, in this segment, I think this is something that, of course, has been lighting the media up, right? This idea of really just the Epstein cover-up, right? And I think this is a particular piece of content that I think really does a good job in terms of really being informative and also accurate in terms of the emotions that it really translates, right? Or that it really inspires in the people that digest this content about this particular story, because there's a lot going on in terms of a lot of different stories out there. First off, rest in peace if you are listening to like any of the right-wing commentators that are just like trying to get in line. Just this simple first, that just condolences, okay? Because your mind is absolutely dead at that point. Like, first off, like one of the guys, who was it, Charlie Kirk, he came out and he said, I'm just gonna trust my friends in the administration, and I'm like, oh, like, it's, I mean, what he's really saying is, I'm really just state media TV. That's it. That's all you're gonna get here, and I don't know why you'd expect anything else. And that's all. That, I mean, I think that's been the case for a long time for a lot of these guys, but I think this really hits the nail on the head in terms of what's really going on. Now, in this particular segment that we're highlighting, this is where Chris Hedges interviews a guy who really put out the most information on this particular case, right? So the flight logs, he actually published the flight logs. He actually, and he couldn't get anybody to take this story at first, which is so interesting. It's so telling. Once it got out there and the floodgates open, everybody, all these media channels, or at least people, started to come back and like, hey, like, I'm just like, it's crazy. I mean, we'll get into it a little bit probably, but the idea of like just these guys just being completely just, there are no morals, there are no principles in the media. I don't think you should expect that, and I think we should really just move along and with that, and carry that understanding in terms of how we understand the world going forward, right? But in any case, it's a really, I'm not going to cover all this segment in terms of like just break down the actual segment itself in terms of the actual pieces, because I mean, this is, like I said, like this particular interview is so informative in terms of really putting things out there, and we'll talk about things and keys that we got from this segment, but everything in there is so powerful, and you'll really learn a lot from that. Now, when it comes down to this particular case, I think Republicans need to understand, like, that first off, like, Democrats, when they call Trump like a criminal, right? I think a lot of you guys you may see like just some a liberal person clutching their pearls while they call him a criminal, and this is wrong, and these people need to pay, and and you think like, yeah, they're all criminals. This is our criminal that's going, like. But I think you guys really need to understand that, in terms of this particular news segment, really brought out that this guy's actually like a creep, like not like a creep, like, oh my god, like, like just a kind of a standard understanding of the word creep, but like a creep, like you sit next to this guy in a bar for like 2 seconds and you realize like, oh, I need to find an excuse to go to the bathroom, and then never come back. Like that. That's what we're talking about here, and you guys really should understand that, because it is important, because right now, and we'll probably get into this a little bit later, but the representatives, the platform Democrats, they're not going to really portray that message, and the idea is then they'll be challenged about what their party really does platform in a lot of cases, and who their party platforms. So they really can't come out about that. And that's this idea of just the Democrats. I think we have this this understanding. I said we. I am an firm independent, sorry. But Democrats, I think the idea here is you need to understand that this cover-up was established, and it was something that was kept up through the both Democratic administrations. So this was in 2008. That's when Epstein was first arrested, but it went to the Obama administration. It went through the the Biden administration, and it also went through Trump 1, which is another point. But the idea here is that this is something that was this is something that was very much installed and kept up. It was not deinstalled. There was no person to come in and dismantle the idea and try to really protect the victims, right? And we hear about, like, I want to really get this through our heads right now, especially with the Democrats in particular. There's something going on with Congress, right? In terms of they're supposed to be leading the charge. That Democratic representatives are really just leading the charge about getting this idea of list, and to force the list out and the information out, or to not force, but to try to get the legal system to work with them in terms of getting the list out. And it's failing. Republicans are quite literally falling on their sword for this particular thing, and that is definitely interesting. But the idea here is, I think we hear about powerful people on the list, right? We hear about this, but we really don't understand the pressure to keep this cover up, in terms of how we need to understand things to really move forward past this particular point. The video does a great job of explaining this idea of blackmail in terms of previous administration, like how we have a long history of this. But that idea of blackmail, the blackmailer realizes to an extent to where, or that the people compromised and the positions that they are in are very much indispensable to their goals and position in society. So I want you guys to really understand that this idea of it not coming out, that being just not a question, the best thing we're going to get is people to not really, or the politicians to not really talk about this. You need to understand, this idea is like is instrumental to their position and power in society. Okay? These people, what they have, it is very useful, right? What we're talking about here. And we're not talking about just representatives. We're talking about business people. We're talking about people who have a lot of power in society in general, right? That's the thing. A lot of you guys really, you guys need to understand there are people that are involved in this that are very much useful in a way that may not really seem apparent to many of us, right? I think a lot of us know why politicians would be useful, but when you got legitimate business people who are somehow connected to a lot of the things we interface with every day, it becomes it's going to make you squint in a way that you really didn't think about before, I believe. And this is all sleepy, right? So this, in terms of like the people on the list, in terms of how they actually impact society, but in terms of actual backing, please look up this one guy, Leon Black. He is literally he's private equity, and I don't know who raises the flag and goes to war for private equity, but it's really, it's pretty. What's being done there is just ridiculous, right? Like I feel so comfortable like just saying we don't need this idea in society, we don't need these people in society, and just making that blanket statement, even though there's like I've heard things like, oh, there's some good that could come out of XYZ. I'm like, yeah, this is great, we'll do without them. But in any case, I think this idea, I really want to get out this idea, because I watched some particularly podcast, or not podcasters, but some indie media, and they're reviewing mainstream media. And there was one particular segment where they were just like, I don't know why they're still calling this a conspiracy theory. It was, and this was a left-leaning guy, but he was just like, I don't know. He was reviewing a segment about how there's more interest in this case, and he came out. It's like, I don't know why they're still calling this a conspiracy theory. There's documentaries on this. This is pretty much out there, but they're still sticking with this idea in terms of at the end of the segment, you'll see that it's where they say oh my god, there's a 1,200% interest increase in this particular case. And at the end of the segment, they you'll see it's, I forget their names, but you'll literally see the woman come from the side, and she'll say something, and she says something like, yeah, when you provoke conspiracy theorists, this is what you get. Could have done completely without that. That wasn't even there was no sustenance really added to that idea, except for the fact of, oh, this may not even be real. This whole thing that we're up in a roar about, it may just be something that, hey, and I also heard somebody say something I really do think he killed himself. He sat in front of a camera and said it, and I'm just this is a indie. This is why you got to be careful online a lot of times. We talked about how a lot of the Republicans are going just mainstream or just state media TV. A lot of like the Democratic type of indie news out there right now, it is that's what they do. That is literally what they do. They are funded and well funded by shady people, and it does not matter to them what they say. There are no morals and principles behind what they say. They get a script and they say it, just like all these other mainstream media outlets. Their job is to find a way to say that Donald Trump is spitting in your face, while they are going to still spit in your face, just from a different angle. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's the idea. And you guys, and there needs to be a solid understanding there, because, like I said, the people out there, a lot of them are just, they're real, like, indie. And another thing you guys need to understand, media is putting these guys out here, and they're making it a point to say some girls as young as 14. When you watch this interview, I want you guys to understand something. There were kids under 10 involved with this, okay? So this idea that, oh, these guys are, they know, the media understands. The younger, the more repulsive and disgusting that this really gets, and the more chances that somebody's actually going to dig something up and say something about this. This is a bipartisan understanding. This is not a one-side understanding. This is a bipartisan understanding that there is something that is going to have to be. There's going to have to be a cover-up. We just got to figure out the angle. That's why they got these clowns out here talking like, it is so crazy. It is so crazy. But it's like, I'll put it to you like this. It's just like, I'm saying like, okay, you test this theory out, you test this theory out, and whatever one kind of gets, the people less in a roar, we're going to go with that. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's what it feels like right now. That's what you guys really need to understand. And there are some good guys out there. I'm telling you, there's some really good guys out there. Some pretty solid people. I think I'll say this. First off, a lot of the Republican base, the independent media, they're kind of exposing themselves as being very cult-like. They're like, that is like it. They're not. There is some, like, I've noticed just some level of playing along with every single one, which is so crazy. Because if this is news to you, I am so sorry, but yeah, Trump's on the list. It's not like, that's not like Elon Musk coming out like, oh, I'm really just that smart. Like, yeah, okay, we like this. Oh goodness, I want to go in so bad. But this idea of like where things are at right now, they need to sell you. They need to sell you some spit in your face. They need to sell you spit in your face somehow, some way. And I'll be gosh darn it, those Democrats gotta figure it out. I'm just like, if you guys are a Democratic team, you're expecting them to really putt the ball, like really like throw the, get that touchdown now. No, it's not gonna happen. It's not gonna happen. I'm sorry. This idea, I think you really guys need to understand something. One, it's just not gonna happen. You're gonna get spit in your face regardless. But also, like, when this wave comes, because a lot of Republicans are falling on the sword, assuming that things are kind of operating in the way they're operating now in terms of the way the country operates and society operates. I'll tell you this: for the best case scenario for people who are just so hopeful about Democrats, in terms of really like just getting back in power, they're just, they were really our superheroes, they just need to get back in power. I need you guys to understand something. Bernie's gonna get in, or they're gonna get in, and they're gonna dangle Bernie in front of your face like this is some kind of like innovative new thing to have universal health care or something like that. And they're gonna pretend like, oh my god, Like, it's just so hard when we follow the rules, when we just watch this guy and this clown show take place. They're gonna pretend like, oh my God, it's just so hard. We just really need to make sure that, maybe we can kind of get something in to, maybe get some kind of like, get the old coverage back. I don't even know. We really gotta figure out this thing. That'll be the that's how that goes. Like this idea of where we're at now. In terms of an actual, we'll talk about the actual what a renaissance means in terms of today. Palantir is still going to win, right? They are bipartisan in their support, right? For those, and that's important, particularly. I know, like, I don't know why there are so many, like, just when it comes down to the threat of Palantir and just, I mean, like, the Republicans, they got the brainworms now, but Democrats, when it comes down to Palantir, total surveillance and stuff like that, and what's happening, they firmly have brainworms, and there's, like, that is crazy to me. But particularly the Republicans should understand that Palantir still wins, right? And whatever power Trump has given them, there's not going to be any real rollback. There's going to be, like, just Elon and the weird tech bros. They're still going to have all your data, right? There's not going to be anything significant that happens there. And this idea reminds me of how, like, the FBI under Hoover was given, like, just powers in the shadow to really expand the surveillance state, to quite literally expand the surveillance state. And you guys need to understand, they don't really have to disclose a lot of what happens. They're not going to. They're not going to talk about this idea. Oh, we're just making things more efficient, and then, some kind of some kind of, like, I'm imagined on, like, some kind of, like, Democrat who really understands whispering, like, hey, Trump, shut up about Palantir, and just, like, there's going to be a level of understanding there that's just already, hey, what else can we get away with? Israel will still get our weapons, our money, and they will possibly get a war. That's not gonna that's not something that changes. They'll pretend something. They'll just, like, Joe Biden let this go on for however long and whatever, and then Bernie stands up after like I'm like, you're, like, standing up and, like, the cities and towns are in rubble. Like, this is such a clown show. Like, this is, I mean, I'll be honest with you, it's ridiculous, but that'll be your understanding. Also, your rent's gonna stay high, right? They're gonna dangle things like rent freezes, subsidized housing, and they're gonna come up with all kinds of creative ways to dress up this idea of affordability. If you don't know, houses are built to be affordable, right? It's not the idea of dressing this up is to see yourself. The people who are in those houses, they want you to see yourselves as failures. They don't want you to know that they are on the take. That is why your house rent is going up. They don't want you to know that, right? They don't want you to know that BlackRock pays them to make sure that they aren't regulated, to increase your rent, to be unaffordable. They want to dance around this idea of really just making themselves seem useful, seem like they have placements in society, when the main job of a politician should be making sure that we don't enter a war. That's the main job. That's a civilized society is defined by the number of politicians, because they realize, hey, we don't want to go to war, let's try to make something work. That's the only job for politicians. For them to say, oh, we're going to stabilize rent, and well, let's talk about why it's unaffordable. And this is getting to the territory of why I'm like really not. I'm not up for like the whole give and take thing. So when you guys hear me talk about the Foundry and you hear me like give ideas, you guys take it. If you're more political, you're able to kind of like do those deals and arrangements that give or take it and go as far as you can with it. This is why I don't do this whole Band-Aid game with these guys. They're like, a lot of times it's just, I am so fed up with a lot of these people. Come back, Sleepy. All right. First off, this idea of, well, the last thing on the list. They also do the idea of just, when we talk about just regulating people in a meaningful way, private equity is going to still, like, we're talking about if the Democrats get back into power and they're going to be the ultimate fixer to Donald Trump. Private equity isn't going to be reined in. They're not going to be regulated in any meaningful way. They pay your politicians. That's the idea here. That's what it is. They pay your politicians. They're not bipartisan. They don't care, Democrat or Republican. They're going to essentially, they even with the COVID crisis and all that, you guys should understand something. Like, regardless of what you think about COVID in general, this idea, when it comes down to the hospitals, they had less stock because they were already buying out and already being eroded by private equity in a lot of cases. There are hospitals that are currently being closed down. Right, More Perfect Union just had some kind of segment on this particular thing, and please understand, this isn't something that you're just going to magically fix by getting the right party in office. This isn't something that just happens. When it comes down to this idea of a renaissance, you guys, I gotta be careful. You guys really need to understand something. One, that idea of the people in power, the pressures that are kind of playing in terms of this particular cover-up, that's not going to be an important factor for. The people won't allow for that to be an important factor. This idea of free healthcare or universal healthcare, for some reason, I don't know why, the Koch brothers did something instrumental when it came down to the Republicans in general, when it came down to like pairing the rights of some kind of like oil conglomerate to simply just basically destroy the world, and pairing that in terms of the government regulation that wants to stop that, pairing that idea with this idea of gun rights. And the idea is, hey, government's overreaching, man. They're like, and you got this guy, it's literally the owner of an oil company trying to purvey this message, like, the government's really overreaching, man. They want to like stop, they want to force me to do all these extra hoops, and then they want to take your guns away. like what? I don't know what that is. I'm not sure how that works, but the idea here is universal healthcare should not be. That's not a like the idea of Democrats. That needs to be studied in terms of the psychology here for people to think that, oh no, this isn't a conservative thing. Where they have healthcare, they have universal healthcare in quote unquote first world societies. That's what it is. That's not like, because you don't want corporations getting people down to the idea of numbers. You don't want them treating other people like numbers. It's extremely important. This idea first in Palantir, there is an understanding to where we can't simply take what Palantir sells us, what these phone companies sell us, as the only way. We can't do that. That's not something that we're going to be able to continue with. If you guys have any experience with the world before the age of the internet, you understand that, hey, these guys are probably not the best people to rely on to in terms of the future of society, and they'll be regulated in a meaningful way at very least. This idea of sending our weapons and money to Israel, no, that's not a thing. That's absolutely not a thing. I want you guys to understand something. The Israeli government represents Jewish people as much as the CIA represents American people. That is it. That stops. There is no, we're going to give you weapons to, do what you want in the Middle East. Or, God forbid, you're going to get just a war, all-out war for your gains in the Middle East, which is ridiculous. The idea of there is no rent freezes or subsidized housing because, like I said, housing is built to be affordable to the populace. You don't see golden houses coming up because there's no people who can afford to buy a golden house. There shouldn't be stop trying to sell the idea that, we just need to make housing affordable. No, you need to, I'm going to get on a rant, and it's already an hour? Jeez, okay, 1 second. Your girlfriend, okay, and private equity is reined in, okay? You guys need to understand something. Right now, the more we yell that we're free, the more we look like just basic, mental patients being held hostage. That's really what it is right now, okay? And particularly by our Pentagon. And we got to remember what this idea of America, this experiment really is. And what's really is and what's really supposed to be. Not what it is and how it actually comes out and how it's manifesting today, how it was supposed to manifest. Okay? And it's simple. We got to stop accepting less. This particular portion is just Foundry lessons from the Islamic Empire, and I'm just dangling this in front of you guys' face, right? So the idea here is you guys can go to the Substack, and this is going to be a particular article that's behind the paywall, but it is extensive, and this is me. I'm just what is this, what do you call it? A third party looking in from the outside. But this particular article, it is so amazing. It might be the best article ever written, who knows, but you'll have to go behind the paywall to see it. This particular report is on really the idea of war crimes, right? And this is the part of the series that we've been kind of talking about, and this is by the Global Investigative Journalism Network, right? And the segment today is on the idea of starvation, right? And this was written by Maggie Michelle, we'll say. But hopefully you guys, I'm really hoping that nobody has direct experience with the idea of starvation, but people should understand that there's a drastic alteration when it comes down to the psychology of a person when they are actually starving, right? And I don't know if this particular idea or example would be considered a war crime, but I remember reading about I remember reading about this idea of just nuclear bombs in general, or nuclear fallout. And there was a family that survived, and just one image that really sticks out is just how this desperate mom was trying to like breastfeed her baby, right? And she was like struggling to really address like her chest, which was already, she was starving, so she was kind of like she was drying up basically, in terms of like just the idea of what healthy people look like versus what unhealthy people look like who are starved. And she was trying to feed the baby with, I mean, essentially just a chest that was definitely not going to be giving a lot of milk, right? And that was probably the most powerful image in terms of actually really realizing how bad things could really get. And just a friendly reminder, if you have babies, or if you know of a family with baby, just recommend to keep dry milk around. Just cases of dry milk, a storage of dry milk is very important. Now, in terms of a quote directly from this particular article by Maggie, or just sourced by Maggie and or whatever, but it's in the article. In 2025, 343 million people faced acute hunger, with the majority, 65% of them, in fragile or conflict-hit countries. According to food security experts, in 2025, Sudan and South Sudan, the Gaza Strip, and Haiti are facing the worst crisis. Okay? And I want you guys to also understand, just because weapons are put away, that doesn't mark the end of a conflict or a struggle for people in war-torn areas, okay? Many times, and for many reasons, residents can be left without food and forced to some serious extremes. I think this idea of starvation really sticks in terms of some of the imagery that I've come into contact with. But this idea of, there was a great famine in China, right? This isn't war particularly, but it does really tell a tale here, because in terms of, we talked about how the psychology can be altered. There was a great famine in China in the late 1950s and early 1960s, right? And there are accounts of towns that are simply just desolate, right? And the tree bark in a lot of these towns, it was scraped clean, right? Man-made lakes were like pumped for the fish. And these fish were not good. I think it was mollusk or something. I forgot what it was. But these fish were not meant to eat. They were not, and they were there, but they were in the pond because they weren't particularly good fish to eat. But they were pumped. The ponds were pumped for these fish. I could only imagine how hard it was to pump the pond and then like to get the fish. That's crazy. But also there were accounts, I think even more crazy is the idea of like grave robbings. People robbing graves and resorting in order to cannibalize the actual the people in the graves. And I mean, it just sounded, that book, there was a book, particularly a book that I read about this particular phenomena. I think it was called I forgot exactly what it's called. I'm not going to say it here. But the idea here is that there were some, it sounded like a hellscape already. And, I mean, and there was even an account where, like, some little girl broke down and, like, she confessed to eating her little brother. And that was I mean that it was a hard read. It was a really hard read. I'm not gonna lie, but the idea here is that you can. That's the psychology. I think it really portrays the psychology of people in a situation where they are starving, when they are really legitimately starving, and when you want to manipulate or control populations of people, if you consider, like, when you're just void of morality and principle, that idea, that impulse, that to use food to get whatever you want, that can be a tremendous factor. And the article discusses, like, investigating, particularly, like, all these articles. It's called, the series is called Investigating War Crimes, right? So they're always talking about how to investigate things, and investigating particularly starvation and war can become more important in terms of on the ground individuals in the actual, in the actual fray. You need to understand that there's a lot of room that a lot of these guys can play with, right? We'll talk about that a little bit later, but the complications are one thing, but all the international humanitarian law actually defines starvation as depriving civilians of objects that are objects indispensable to the survival of civilians. This now, just a few things that are listed. One, this can be intentional destruction of livelihood, crops and markets, seizing or destroying food stocks, blocking humanitarian aid, Israel, forcing masses into displacement and resulting in losing income and livelihood. And this is, this is all Israel, I'll say. But apparently, the idea, in terms of the complications and why it's important in terms of this idea, starving combatants isn't a war crime. It's not a war crime, right? So collateral is something that, this idea, we talked about the principles when it comes down to war crime. The two primary principles was proportionality, and I think some kind of basically defining combatant. I forget the actual name of the principle itself. But when we talk about the idea of proportionality, this reminds me of that, right? They can play with this concept of proportionality, because when you want to starve combatants, it's a lot easier to say, oh, they were just, in the way. The civilian population that lived there, they were just kind of the collateral damage. And it's interesting because they play with a lot of different things, right? This idea of exaggerating pre-existing conditions or situations to really hide their conscious efforts, right, when they have extreme cases. And the courts haven't seen it, this particular according to the article, the courts haven't used this particular idea or this particular starvation to prosecute people, which is likely due to the complications involved, and also just the people who are just blatantly ignoring international law. And well, this idea of I think we've heard this to kind of an extreme extent, even though apparently, like, Israel hasn't come out and, like, really just openly addressed this idea of what's going on in their particular crimes. but there was an argument that was saying that basically in Gaza, they were saying that Hamas will use the aid or prevent it from being given to individuals who need it. There's a lot of things wrong with that statement, and more than I have time for to get into right now. But I'm sure we'll talk about it at some point. This Maggie, in terms of this particular article, I think is very important because Maggie gives a firm tool sets for people to really start looking into, and we really should at least take a glance at what's valuable in terms of really understanding it, even if you don't plan on visiting a war-torn area, but you can understand what's out there. Now, this, I think, now Gaza keeps coming up with these war crime series, and of course, but Sudan is another reoccurring example, right? And in terms of starvation, in Sudan in particular, there was a civil war, and the government started bombing markets and killing civilians in areas where this other force, this, we'll call them the rebel force, quote unquote, right, would be likely to expand. And it's crazy to think that the government did this, but this idea of, I think it adds another dimension to the complications here, because when we're talking about starvation, a lot of the times we are talking about the people who are in authority doing or having a hand in this, and not wanting people to really shed light on what's going on. And this particular government, they told aid organizations, quote unquote, there are no legitimate needs in this particular war-torn area, which is Darfur, so you should not work there. And if you continue to respond to needs there, you should not expect visas. And this senior aid official asked not to be named, right? Like I said, Maggie provides a lot of information here, and I think it's really great that's, to really just even glance at it. But they also talk about actual defining famine measurements, and I think that's important as well, in terms of actually having a number to put to this particular situation. Definitely things that we need to start to really understand, right? Because in terms of this Renaissance sermon, right, we need to understand something. I think the zodiac sign of Scorpio and its modern ruler, which is the planet of Pluto, really helps shed a tremendous perspective on this particular situation, right? This sign of Scorpio, the zodiac sign, the wheel, right, it's opposite to the sign of Taurus, right? Taurus, which is also the sign that represents food and comfort, among other things, right? But we'll just talk about food and comfort here. And Scorpio can, really often be described as the lack of food and comfort in a lot of situations, right? Well, there's a lot of other things, right? Remember, we're zooming in and just talking about a few things. This sign also represents control and manipulation, among other things. Now, when it comes down to here. We're talking about starving populations, so these people can be more susceptible to really the pressures of Scorpio and Pluto. Now, I'll add this idea of, in my opinion, the appeal to morally for simply just morally corrupt militaries who are looking to control populations. It needs to be matched with a very real, concrete fear of international backlash, in terms of that will really replace this idea, the appeal of controlling these populations. Basically that energetic space that is kind of describes their appeal to control and manipulate the populations that we're talking about, really Scorpio, right? Pluto things. This is where the population of people have a new energetic understanding of that particular area, because if they go there, they understand that you can't go there without a consequence. So it almost needs to be that this energetic space needs to be taken with a very serious repercussion that matches that particular idea, or really comes hand in hand with that particular idea of trying to simply starve a population of people. And we really need teeth in terms of this idea of international law, because we lack that. We completely lack that. When we really see a genuine renaissance, I think the U.S. system is going to be set up in such a way, or is set up in such a way to provide the teeth that we're missing now. And we have the populace. We have the constitutions, right? The legality, the words that really describe what we can, or that really describe everything that we really need to do. A lot of cases, we still need to fix a lot of the verbiage that's been put in, but we do have a lot of the verbiage to be able to say that to be able to project the idea of us being free, right? But we're gonna have to we're gonna have to really force the actions of our government to match us as civilians, right? What guides us? What's important to us? We're gonna have to force our government to correct actions on a world stage, right? And just to give you guys an understanding, JFK believed that this idea of the American Revolution, it didn't begin and end with us, right? Because he really didn't see it as something. He saw this as the beginning of a larger movement, a worldwide understanding, a worldwide revolution that happened, that's taking place, and that needs to take place. And it's going to be up to us to really do anything about that. Now, this next segment, this is on really just how just deepfake video took it way farther than it should have, or basically was taken way farther than it should have gone. And this particular situation is where this incident played out was between India and Pakistan. And for those that don't know, they're simply having a conflict between one another. And I'm not completely up to date on the conflict, but I did hear about it in the news, and I'm sure I'll learn more about it as time goes on. But this deepfake video was able to really inflame the tension by really being spread at a pretty alarming rate when you think about the people spreading it believing what was being spread. In the article, it even talks about how just media outlets were willing to report on this particular video without any verification. And I think it's concerning to really think that they had no regulatory provisions in these particular outlets to really prevent reporting on false claims and AI deepfake videos, especially nowadays. But we also need to understand that this is the world we're entering, right? Deepfakes are a problem. But I'm very much worried that the governments will use the prevalence of deepfakes to control information or give us safe information, right? And the idea and this idea of a renaissance, I think we need to combat this not by simply hoping that the government takes control and gives us all the safe information because they're such a great filter for information to fall through, but the idea about simply creating a more aware and informed populace, right? Who was it, Truman? I forget what the president was who said this, but he said a more informed and aware populace is how we control and bridge in the quote-unquote military-industrial complex. And this idea of the real worry is that the same people who really got in line and very viciously deplatformed anyone who is telling us otherwise. They're the same people who were saying that there are weapons of mass destruction in the Middle East. These are the same people. There was no, we're going to hold everyone accountable that portrayed this line. We're going to make sure that we correct this mistake. There was none of that. Those people are still active. They are still in power. And they still, and that energy is very much still pervasive throughout our media today. We need to understand something, that this idea of deepfake videos, it's a real problem. It is a very real problem. But what should keep us up all night is the idea of a government convincing people. I mean, if you are a Democrat or left-leaning, you're probably, you might be one of these people. Hopefully you're not, but if you are, hopefully change course in terms of like, hey, I'm just going to do what I'm told and be a good citizen. That sounds great. It's not it's not recommended by any stretch of the imagination. But these people feeding you safe information, that needs to be what keeps you up all night, right? There are problems in society that people benefit off of because our government is corrupt. We need to understand that. That an idea that I think would be really nice is a system of really third-party verifiers who are kind of like more so put themselves in certain situations and kind of portray just different pieces of media, or just kind of dish out different pieces of media. And it could become a complex system, but I think it's well worth it in terms of the actual idea of creating a more informed populace and more informed people. And it could definitely really help people share information with more confidence in terms of how much verification that's out there, and simply just make people feel more empowered, I would say. And this idea of that news, this source of news or whatever, like this is, or the media outlet in general, being able to just put out and report on a deep fake, that should be like shamed. Like you should be shamed and like off of your platform. That there is no reason why that should ever be a thing. And maybe they didn't know about deep fakes. I don't know, but it's hard to believe that. But we'll see. But that is something that should. That should be something that should be smacked down. Like they should get their hands smacked very hard about something like that. At the very least, they should have like some kind of like third-party oversight or something that they should be subject to. And this is the future, though. We got to realize that the future, we're kind of at a crossroads here. Either we give the government more power to control things, or we become more popular or more informed and powerful as a populace. And it's clear what my answer is, and I certainly hope it's clear what your answer will be. This next segment is really how it's on this idea of city revival, right? Because particularly this article that we're referencing is about how Chicago is really suffering, and they're going to talk about this accelerating vacancy rate in the downtown area specifically. And I can't hammer this on the head enough, but we as a society, we are for sale. When you talk about our politicians, what they do, how like our Congress the Capitol has, or the Capitol building, what is it, Washington, the White House, or the where all of our congressmen like get into a circle and circle jerk each other. That's been called the most expensive brothel, right? Just the world's most expensive brothel. We're for sale. Like, that is not the system is in place to essentially create drag load, so politicians, as they get more influential, they actually have to accumulate more and more responsibilities to people that at some point they have to come to terms and realize that these people represent something that is directly opposing the health and interest of their own people. I am this idea of us being for sale. I think private equity is one of the most powerful indicators of this. But I'm really gonna just this is Sleepy talking, just without like the backing of an actual article in front of my face to describe this particular phenomena. But I'm guessing that the lack of vitality in many of our city centers is another indicator that we're for sale. Okay? And we could talk about just a lot of pieces here, but in particular, what I really want to discuss is how really just the idea of Chicago going the other, just trying to just go in and address this particular topic. And they want to transform the city in a variety of ways, right? And The University of Chicago Harris School of Public Policy launched an annual innovation challenge to grad students to come up with proposals to revive the area called the Loop in the city. And they got some good ideas, actually. I like it. They developed this particular idea for this stretch to be created into a haven for creatives, right? And they want to make this a car-free stretch to promote more interactions. Another plan is to renovate buildings and provide subsidized housing and link residents to social initiatives. And they also talk about transforming the ground floor into farmers markets and community centers. But those social initiatives, for example, was like a rooftop baseball team or something like that. I thought that was pretty neat. And I like both of these plans in terms of the plans that are mentioned in this particular article. But I do want to say that this idea, what's happening in Chicago, is missing something very instrumental in terms of this concept of a Blackbird Renaissance, right? And that particular something is utilizing the creatives and social initiatives to link locals to policy, okay? To what transforms the world around them, how the world transforms around them. The idea here is people need to be more than occupants of a space. They need to be locals in a community. And I have various really like additions and my own ideas in the Foundry Zine, but the essentials are creating an empowered populace, right? If you can do this, you don't really need Sleepy's idea. You don't need that. Just as long as you have an empowered populace, that's the meat. Okay, you don't really need the potatoes, right? You don't need the potatoes. You can get something else. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's okay. But we also need a segment. Apparently, like with this particular article, they talk about this transformation has to really be connected to family planning, and they take quite a bit of the section of the article to describe this, because families don't necessarily when you talk about transforming a city, a lot of times you're not thinking about how to retain actual families in the city. You're just thinking about how to contain professionals, young professionals in a city. And people misunderstand this idea because that is, I think, a lot of the times what makes a city is the idea of just true diversity, right? Not how, like, we've been kind of getting brain fed by just everybody. It's this idea of what is an actual, like, health, city health, an indicator for city health. And that's for a number of reasons. But one thing we need to understand in terms of making and designing a city is these ideas of families versus young professionals, they don't spend money the same. There's not going to be the same pressures when it comes down to Friday nights or the weekends. There's a different pressure that's involved, and the city has to transform itself in that particular light and that understanding. And there are so many I'm gonna not go off on tangents here, but the idea here and mentioned in the article is neighborhood parks, more schools, more housing options outside of this concept of the studio apartment, which is just tremendous and just everywhere in the city. But there's also this case study mentioned in Canada where they described a lot, like a just real success and a showcase for how conversions can really provide for family. And they also have another case study in the opposite direction where just conversions just completely fail in terms of actually trying to get a actual population of any types of families in there. And they describe the importance of 3-bedroom houses or 3-bedroom apartments and spaces rather than studio apartments or 2 bedrooms, and that's kind of an indicator in terms of how much of that is available to how attractive a city will be to a population of just family people in general. And this, I think we also see something that is really something that I'm going to circle back on and definitely dig deeper on in another segment. And this is how really offices can be converted into residential spaces in general, because the Loop in general, the area that Chicago talked about revamping, or really is proposing revamping, they were losing office people, but they were gaining residential people. So that was a huge thing. And if you don't know, there's a really big problem in America after this whole COVID thing of office space that's not being utilized. And this is, I think it's important to highlight this understanding in terms, or this problem in general, because I don't think any of us are going to shed tears about some rich person who can't afford their second private yacht, but I think it does put something out there in terms of the idea of unused construction going to waste. This idea, this is off script, I got a little bit of time, but the idea of acupuncture, city acupuncture or something like that. There's a concept, I want to say acupuncture renovation or revival or something like that, but the idea is a city, this is originated in China, and I believe it's used in China right now, but it's used in a few places, but it started in China. But the idea is the city had a recognition that all of these places that were failing and that weren't attracting people and weren't being utilized, they could be revived and help revive the city as a whole. Okay? Those particular dead centers in a city could, and they could be impacting the city as a whole as well, in terms of actually like seeing the downfall of really what could take place, or really we may be living in a time to where we don't see the true possibility of something because we don't even, or basically we're unable to see the negative impact because we're knee deep in it, but having that awareness that, hey, if we address these few places, then we can revive a city. That's something that we should go in and really try to create real initiatives around. And very important there, and there's a lot there in terms of I can talk about, but I don't want to spend too much time on that. But the idea here is that the people now, like in terms of the construction, when it fails, we should understand that the conversions aren't so simple, right? We can't just say, oh, those are places that aren't being used, let's just make those into things. We can't just take a space and utilize it. We can't just utilize it for our purpose, or just utilize it as residential, assuming that it just works because it's a space. And to some element, yeah, I'm sure like it actually would be a warm place to lay your head. You could put a bed there as long as it's a space. But you don't understand of how, like, residential construction is regulated. For instance, a lot of these places got to think about escapes, residential, like, stairways, stuff like that. But particularly in this article, they talk about how buildings built before the use of air conditioning, or just the spread of air conditioning, those places are actually of more value because of the way they use window spaces, the way they try to keep window spaces in an area. And because that helps, because for bedrooms, it requires a window for bedroom in terms of actually like ICC, right? The construction code in general. It requires a bedroom space to have an actual window in it, and that's for a number of reasons. But that's very much one of the things that could be a problem in the future if you don't see it and you don't build and design for it. And we want to do the best we can to stay a first world society, and however we move forward in the right way. And it's there are some good things to really this definition of a quote-unquote first world society. And in terms of a lot of the conversions that we talk about, that are talked about in this article, or the most efficient conversions, it sounds like they're going to be more communal, right? Just for the simple fact of how office space is set up. The plumbing arrangement in an office space kind of really leans more towards a communal use in terms of conversion, and that makes things more efficient. And they also talk about how these conversions will lead to more affordable units, and I think it's, of course, I think I mentioned this in the Mom Donnie episode. A lot of stuff is coming up again, but the idea here is, or about free buses and Mom Donnie's effort to get free buses in episode 5, I believe. But we want that socioeconomic mixing of classes. That's going to be really important, and that is important for a number of reasons. And I'm sure I'll just let your imagination play there, right? And when it comes down to this idea of a renaissance, we can't keep trying to find ways to name initiatives so that they're seen as band-aids on our failure as a person when we go into particular places that allow for affordable or low-cost initiatives, subsidized housing and rent-freeze housing and other fixes. And the governments, or the politicians and the governments, they want to sell these initiatives as band-aids because they know the most important job of a politician, when your government is constantly at war, the most important job for a politician is trying to sell themselves as an important fixture of civilized society. That's it. Okay? So selling this as a temporary band-aid that the government is giving you, that makes them seem more important. That makes them feel more important. And we have to see and understand that's just like there is no such thing as affordable housing. Housing is affordable. That's the reason it's housing. That's the reason it was built. When a contractor goes up, they don't build a mansion in a place where everybody, the average income is something less than $1 million a year. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's not, like, why would you do that? It's not economically feasible to think that you can do that and get away with it. It's just I'm gonna get off my high horse here, but it's something that we have to understand and really start to react to in a way to where we're not trying to sell initiatives as band-aids. We're just trying to correct society. Now, this next segment is based on smell, right? Or aromatics and our interface with aromatics in general, right? And the idea of really just the scientific understanding, because this article in general, it describes the mystery behind smell, behind the sense of smell. And it is, when we think about humans, we think about us as the bad smell, the animals that don't have good smelling, and other animals just have a better machinery to smell, and that may not really be the case in terms of actual machinery, right? We have a large capability to smell, right? Our machinery is here, but there's they found basically how your brain filters the amount of importance that it gives to the sense of smell to operate in society is obviously declined when in relationship to other animals. And the idea of where we're coming from as a species, this is one of our most ancient senses for how to really interface with the world. Just to kind of give you guys an understanding, like chemicals, molecules, right? We have an ability to smell that to a degree, right? And if we're talking about evolution, right? Our individual cells, they can't see, they can't taste, but they can sense chemical gradients, or chemical, basically how concentrated or where a chemical is in a system or whatever, and they can orient themselves like that in certain ways. That's actually how the embryo is formed or whatever. But the idea of smell, that translates into the actual cell itself, right? So when we talk about evolution, we came from this the proposal is that we came from this single cell organism to this multicellular, really complicated organism. And this idea of how we did that is it's a mystery, but our sense of smell is something that is that very much speaks to the way in which we had to interface just period at some time. And there's a lot here, right? And I'm obviously excited about it because it's just the idea of, I think, in terms of mystery in the world, I think we have we have a real barrier that we're coming up against right now, because a lot of scientists are talking like, oh, they're like a lot of these guys aren't really like known for pioneering us in terms of to improve society in any way, but they know they know a lot, but they don't know. I would say they don't know how much they don't know, and I think that's the problem with a lot of people, because they're very much willing to smack down a lot of different methodologies and things like that, but they're not pioneering. Those aren't the pioneers. The people who stand up and they get on a YouTube channel and they talk about how much they know, those aren't the pioneers. Those aren't the people. Like, there's some kind of like I want to say it was some kind of physicist, and no, he's in Europe. I forget what city or what actual country, but he said when you may become an atheist when you begin to sip the cup of science or something like that. I'm so butchering this, but at the bottom, but at the end of the quote, he says, at the bottom of the cup, God is waiting, right? And that idea, that concept of understanding what you don't know, I think that's how we move forward in a society. Because I am never quick to smack down people or smack down, different things. It's just like, hey, you kind of have to understand that our so-called mastery over gravity, like we can fly planes in the sky and we can heal people. That's what they'll say. We're working with the forces of gravity. We don't control the forces of gravity. We are working with the forces of gravity. There's a very real power difference there, right? There's a very real understanding. When we talk about healing people, we're not healing people. We are creating the conditions for our body to heal itself. We have an understanding that is very like the people who get out front and they say, we know everything, we got everything, we this is how things go. You're describing, you're very much confident about the level of power that society has gained through this particular, whatever understanding that you have. Yeah, absolutely. And a lot is like, sometimes it's for good reason, maybe it's done some pretty cool things, but let's not fool ourselves. Let's really understand something. Like, where we're at now versus where we can go, you don't understand. You don't understand where we can go. That's why you're talking about why you're so idolized about where we're at now, right? The pyramids are just a huge smack in the face for any of these guys to say, oh, we know exactly what this and that is. I'm like, cool, that's great. You can postulate and say really big words and sound really fancy for a very long time, I'm sure, but at the bottom of the cup, God is waiting. And when it comes down to this idea of, just getting back to the article, because I'm always going to get distracted, but we should understand that we can use this, right? And I think it was Islam or some form of Islam, some kind of meeting I went to where they were discussing how our understanding 3D reality is God slowed down, right? And this, follow me for a second. The idea here of the concept of a fan spinning, it's spinning very fast and a fan that's on, but when you cut it off and it starts to slow down, that's where you get 3D reality, right? Because it's a concept like where all the fans slowed down to a very large extent. And when it comes down to the concept of smell, that is something that is able to sense high frequencies, right? It's close, I would say it's closer to the concept of this world of just the unknown in general and the world of the unseen in general. And I feel like there's something here. if we can start to work with this particular idea more and more, we actually have a significant amount of resources in terms of like our actual our human biology in general, right? Is we dedicate a lot to the sense of smell, and the article goes over that and talks a lot about that, and we really do need to dig into this, and I don't think we even tap the potential for how we can move into the understanding and how we can use this to really help other people and design places and spaces in general. But this is something I'm really excited about, and I'll tease you guys with another like paywalled article at some point about it. Now, this is so crazy, right? Because this particular idea, this article is about a digital sculpture, right? Which it doesn't sound as exciting, like why are you excited type thing, but it's just like doing what they've done here, I think is crazy. It's crazy because all of the actual, the inventions are here, the data's here, but they put it in such a place to where I am like legit, like a lot of y'all are probably like just maybe rolling your eyes like, Sleepy, you're always excited about something, but I am genuinely excited about this. This is like real, like this feels like something that we need to hammer down on. And the concept here is that like this digital structure is linked in various ways to and just the data that comes in from people observing the environment, right? So for instance, when it rains, the sculpture will shed tree sap. When deforestation in the rainforest occurs, the leaves of this particular sculpture, they'll start flickering. When 128 square meters or square kilometers, I don't even know how much, we'll say square meters, but when this set amount of deforestation occurs, a leaf is essentially just lost off the sculpture. When there's a heat wave, the tree acts as if it's struggling. And I'm excited about this for a lot of, like, there's so much potential here. The concept in itself is tremendous, right? Just actually being able to translate things like this. And in terms of what we're looking at right now, society, quote unquote first world society, I think a lot of us have come to an understanding, or may have come across this idea of us, a lot of our problems are being disconnected from the environment. What this does, how this reconnects with technology, using technology in this particular way, I think this is tremendous in terms of really reestablishing and repairing our relationship with technology. And I think this is something that we can certainly use. And I've got a lot of ideas about how to use this in terms of the Foundry in general, and I will certainly, at the very least, I'm going to tease you guys about it. Vince never forgot the sound of the lock clicking shut for the last time. He was 12 when the eviction notice came. His father's face hollow as he crumpled the paper in his fist. The mining company had just cut half of its workforce. His loyalty apparently meant nothing. For 2 years they lived in his uncle's basement, a damp, low-ceilinged space divided by laundry racks and silence. At first Vince didn't mind. His dad was home every day instead of down in the mines, and there was something warm about the closeness. He didn't consider it a cost-cutting measure, and how his mother made pancakes on a hot plate. It felt like an adventure. But his father's smiles grew thin. His voice frayed at the edges. He'd pace the cramped basement, muttering about space and decency, as if the walls themselves were judging him. Dad was his own harshest critic. He would talk to himself when he didn't think anyone else was listening. A man should be able to keep a roof over his family. One night, Vince woke to the sound of glass shattering and his father's voice, low and venomous, in the kitchen above. "You think I wanted this? To have my kids sleeping like rats?" His uncle's weary reply. "Nobody thinks that." The shame festered in him like a wound, and no amount of job applications or interviews could stitch it shut. His father's mood eventually painted the whole experience. He got them out of the basement and started working in a factory, but that shame seemed to linger. That roof, solid, permanent, it became Vince's obsession. He knew mining from his dad. He understood the blueprints that would make his dad's workers zone out, but he studied home and building construction instead of following in his father's footsteps. His father's gruff advice was to be a doctor, a lawyer, or chase stability. But Vince knew that kind of stability was a lie. Years after graduating, he worked for a non-profit building shelters. He saw the same cycle. Families waiting years for approvals, permits denied over zoning technicalities, funding yanked when the politics shifted. He even got with some non-profits and constructed a plan to get ahead of the homelessness crisis, as the mayor liked to call it. It was a detailed map of how the city could reroute the funding that went into emergency shelters to create more permanent affordable housing and possibly get rid of the need for emergency shelters altogether. No one took him seriously. Looking at the amount that went into homelessness, he knew that the funds for construction and ending this problem weren't an issue. The system wasn't broken. It was working exactly as designed. Then there was Javier, a veteran with a laugh like gravel, who taught Vince how to patch a roof with scrap metal. They talked for hours about Javier's dreams, a tiny home community built by and for the unhoused. "Nobody's gonna hand us the keys," he'd say, grinning. "So why ask?" Javi would always tell Vince stories about communities of squatters and old military bases and unfinished construction. He'd talk about how some cities even allowed it, and didn't mind if they operated small businesses like coffee shops or clothing stores. Vince listened and really understood the frustration, but he always let him know, "That's not how things worked here. We gotta deal with the suits, Javi." He kept a convincing mask on to present like he was always happy, but Vince would catch him looking depressed when he thought no one was looking. Javi reminded Vince of his dad. He was proud and a real protector. He gave up his spot in the shelter to his sister and her kids. Vince got a tent for him and pretended like someone left it around the alley where Javi would hang out. Javi's tent was getting worn to where he had to tape up tears, but he wasn't about to complain or ask for a new tent. In a snowstorm, the city decided that'd be a perfect time to clear the encampments. Javier stayed behind to help the others pack and lost his own tent in the process. Apparently, he couldn't find a place in time. Vince got a call 2 days later from the morgue. Hypothermia, they said. But they were wrong. It was the paperwork, the ordinances, the endless no, the mayor's backroom deals. Javi didn't even ask the others to share their tent. He just... Tears welling in his eyes on the walk back home. Vince walked past the street where a group of workers were digging to repair utilities. The walls inside Vince's mind collapsed. He'd been stockpiling materials for years. Extra lumber, wiring, insulation, skimmed from job sites. Now it all clicked. He knew where they'd go. The old Richter mine had an entrance hidden behind a chain-link fence near the rail yard, its tunnels stretching like veins beneath the city. He knew the mines were abandoned but still stable. He could hear Javi's voice telling him, "Nobody's gonna hand us the keys." He was done asking permission. The first night, rigging a stolen generator to the grid, his hands shook. This is a crime. But then he thought of Javier's sister and her kids, sleeping in a shelter with a 2-month waiting list for housing. He thought of his father's eviction, the way his father obsessed over cleaning the basement floor of his uncle's place, of all the doors that can only be opened for the right kind of paperwork. After identifying the abandoned mine, he made the first group of rooms over the past week, working after he got off. Mark stands outside the chain-link fence, snow melting in his hair as he pulls out his phone and calls Javier's sister, Maria. "I have a place," he says. "It's not legal, it's not pretty, but It's dry and it's warm. A pause, and then her voice, brittle with hope. When do we move in? That's the moment. The generator hums the life underground, and in the flickering light, Mark sees not a crime but a future. The guilt burned away. For the first time in his life, he wasn't asking. Guys, that is the end of this particular episode, and I'm gonna say I want you guys to really leave you guys with this idea, right? Or really propose this particular question to you guys. We talked about this digital sculpture. We talked about what it does, how it kind of translates things. What are your particular ideas? One, what would you translate? How would you translate it? Uh, and what are the ideas about this? What are any ideas about the actual sculpture itself? How would you make a sculpture? How would you design a sculpture in a practical way? Don't just say something because it sounds cool. Try to say something that sounds like something you've seen before or you had some kind of experience with, please. But the idea here is, what can you use this for? How can you take this power and use it in your own particular way? With that being said, hey, you guys have a good week, and I'll see you next week.